Chris's public statement had managed to calm the media frenzy, at least for the moment. Investors and board members were reassured that his engagement to Sarah wouldn't affect the company's operations. But while the noise around them subsided, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking in the background. For now, though, he had to focus on Sarah. They had survived the first wave of public scrutiny, but he could tell the strain was wearing on her. The woman he loved was strong, but even she couldn't ignore the immense pressure of having her life turned upside down. One evening, as they sat in Sarah's apartment, enjoying a rare moment of peace, Chris noticed that she seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. "You've been quiet," Chris said gently, reaching for her hand. "What's on your mind?" Sarah sighed, looking out the window at the city lights below. "I just keep thinking about how much my life has changed in such a short time. I didn't ask for any of this, Chris. The attention, the pressure. It's overwhelming." Chris nodded, understanding her frustration. "I know it's a lot to handle, but we'll get through it together." "I believe you," Sarah said, her voice soft but tinged with uncertainty. "But sometimes I wonder if this is the life I want. I never cared about fame or wealth, and now it feels like my every move is being watched." Chris's heart ached at her words. He had brought her into his world, a world she had never asked to be a part of, and now she was paying the price. He squeezed her hand, his voice filled with resolve. "If it gets to be too much, Sarah, we can leave. I can step away from the company. We could build a life that's just ours, away from all of this." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his offer. "You'd really do that? Give up everything?" "Without a second thought," Chris said firmly. "You're the only thing that matters to me. If we need to, we'll walk away from it all." Sarah's eyes softened, and she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Chris, but I don't want you to give up everything you've worked for. I just need time to figure out how to fit into this world, your world." Chris held her close, wishing he could shield her from the storm that still brewed around them. But he knew she was right. Leaving everything behind wasn't a decision they could make lightly. The next morning, Chris was back at his office overseeing operations as usual. But something felt off. Marcus had scheduled a meeting with some key executives, but there was a strange tension in the air that Chris couldn't ignore. As he entered the boardroom, he was met with the usual faces, but there was an unfamiliar man sitting at the far end of the table. He wore a sharp suit and exuded an air of authority, his gaze focused intently on Chris. "Good morning, everyone," Chris said, his voice steady but wary. "Who's our guest?" Marcus, standing by the door, gave a slight nod to the man, signaling for him to introduce himself. "Mr. Anderson, my name is David Kingston," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "I represent certain interests within the financial world. I've been sent to discuss some potential concerns regarding your recent public statement and the attention it's brought to your business." Chris's eyes narrowed. "What kind of concerns?" David leaned forward, his expression calm but cold. "There are powerful people who believe that your personal life has begun to interfere with your business decisions. They're worried about the impact this could have on your company and, by extension, on their own interests. I've made it clear that my personal life won't affect the company," Chris replied, his voice firm. "The board and investors are satisfied with the measures I've taken." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, but some aren't so easily convinced. They're watching you closely, Mr. Anderson. Any misstep and they won't hesitate to act." Chris felt a chill run down his spine. This was more than just corporate pressure. This was a veiled threat. "Who exactly are these people you represent?" Chris asked, his tone sharp. David's smile widened. "Let's just say they're people with significant influence. They prefer to remain in the shadows, but their reach is vast. You've caught their attention, and now they're watching your every move." The tension in the room was palpable. Chris knew that whoever these shadowy figures were, they had the power to cause real trouble for him and his company, but he wasn't about to be intimidated. "I appreciate the warning," Chris said coolly, "but I run my business my way. If these people have a problem with that, they can come to me directly." David stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "I'm sure they will, Mr. Anderson, but for now, consider this a courtesy call. They're giving you the chance to stay in line. I'd take it if I were you." With that, David walked out of the room, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Chris exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded slightly, indicating that he'd look into David's background. Later that evening, Chris told Sarah about the meeting with David. He didn't want to alarm her, but he couldn't keep secrets from her anymore. "So what does this mean?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "It means that we're being watched," Chris said bluntly. "There are people who don't like the attention we're getting. They're powerful and they don't play by the rules." "Are we in danger?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Chris hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No, not yet, but we need to be careful. I'll handle it, Sarah. I won't let anything happen to us." Sarah nodded, but the fear lingered in her eyes. "This is all happening so fast. I just wanted a simple life, Chris." "I know," Chris said softly, pulling her into his arms. "And I'm going to do everything I can to protect that for you." But as they held each other, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in. The world he had tried to shield Sarah from was now creeping into their lives, and he knew that the fight to protect their future had only just begun.